For decades, the people of England wondered what kind of woman turns down every royal marriage proposal. It seemed that Queen Elizabeth I was more focused on ruling England and defeating empires than considering her bloodline to be in danger of extinction. Did she have an ulterior motive, and how did she end up dying as the Virgin Queen? This is the story of Queen Elizabeth I, the most prominent monarch without an heir. Elizabeth's life was dangerous from the start. She was born in 1533 to King Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn, during a time when having a son was seen as the only way to secure a royal legacy. Henry had left the Roman Catholic Church and altered England's entire religious structure solely to marry Anne and attempt to produce a male heir. So when Anne gave birth to a daughter instead of a son, disappointment set in quickly. Elizabeth went from being the celebrated, expected heir to an inconvenience. Her father's obsession with a male heir didn't let up, and her mother's death was ruthless. Anne was executed on charges of adultery and treason when Elizabeth was just 2 years old. After Anne's death, Elizabeth was declared illegitimate, which meant she had no legal claim to the throne. Her older half-sister Mary, the daughter of Henry's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, had gone through a similar situation when Henry divorced her mother. Both girls ended up being tossed aside at different points depending on who Henry was married to at the time. Then, what Henry had longed for so long finally came. He had a royal son, Edward, with his third wife, Jane Seymour. Almost immediately, Mary and Elizabeth were further pushed into the background. They remained part of royal life, although more as political chess pieces than as loved family members. Their childhoods were cold, dull, and influenced by the shifting alliances of the court. Despite this rocky start, Elizabeth was highly educated, more so than most women of her time. She studied Latin, Greek, French, history, and philosophy, and was known for her sharp memory and strong opinions from a young age. She had tutors who treated her like a future leader, even if few at the time thought she'd ever rule. Meanwhile, her relationship with Mary was still strained and distant. While Mary was a devout Catholic, Elizabeth leaned toward Protestantism. Little did they know that that religious difference would later become a significant wedge between them once Mary took the throne. For now, they were simply two girls trying to survive in a palace full of suspicion, spying, and silent power competition. It wasn't until their brother Edward died young in 1553 that things became very tense. Edward had named Lady Jane Grey as his successor, but that plan collapsed within days. Mary quickly claimed the throne and became England's first reigning queen. Elizabeth, as her half-sister, tried to stay in her good graces, but Mary didn't trust her. Mary felt that Elizabeth's popularity among Protestants and her place as Anne Boleyn's daughter made her a threat. So when a Protestant rebellion broke out, Elizabeth was immediately thrown into the Tower of London on suspicion of treason. She spent 2 whole months there, not knowing if she'd live or die, before being released to house arrest under heavy surveillance. Meanwhile, Mary's reign was very intense. She tried to reverse England's shift to Protestantism by restoring Catholicism and marrying Philip of Spain, a move that didn't sit well with the English public. Her efforts, including the execution of hundreds of Protestants, earned her the nickname Bloody Mary. She believed her reign was faring well, but there was one problem. Her health began to fail, not to mention that she was childless. Then, slowly but surely, attention began to shift to Elizabeth as the next likely ruler. By this point, Elizabeth had learned how to speak carefully, act cautiously, and never show her true cards. She remained quiet about her religion in public, avoided court drama, and made sure to appear respectful of Mary, even though she privately held very different views. But Elizabeth had one major challenge. She came from a broken royal lineage. The Tudor family had taken the throne through battle, not through centuries of stability. Her mother's legacy was controversial, and her own legitimacy had been questioned. The country was already divided over religion. Many European powers didn't even consider her a rightful heir, and initially many Catholics wanted her cousin Mary to take the throne instead. Although she had royal blood, she wasn't a safe or obvious choice. The House of Tudor was still seen as somewhat shaky, and Elizabeth had to prove herself before even gaining the crown. Soon, it was 1558, and Mary breathed her last. Elizabeth became Queen of England at the age of 25. The transition wasn't smooth behind the scenes, but many in the country were actually relieved. People had become exhausted by all the religious violence and unstable leadership, so Elizabeth's ascension to the throne felt like a fresh start. They became even more impressed when she made early, smart moves. She kept experienced advisors around her, including William Cecil, and slowly began steering the country back toward Protestantism without provoking chaos. She wore gold, spoke with calm confidence, and made it clear she saw herself as chosen by God, just like any male monarch. On the inside, things didn't feel as calm to Elizabeth. From the very beginning, she had to strike a delicate balance. She was a young woman ruling a divided nation, with foreign enemies watching closely and internal enemies waiting for her to slip. Still, she possessed certain qualities that none of her siblings had shown: patience, strategy, and a unique ability to read people. She didn't rush decisions, she didn't make bold promises she couldn't keep, and she never allowed herself to be overwhelmed by the people's expectations. Her reign had barely begun, but she already understood the power of royal image, strategic timing, and silence. She had survived a dangerous childhood and an even more dangerous rise to power. Now she was queen, and every move mattered. Then came her big moves. Elizabeth didn't waste time making it clear she was in control. Early in her reign, she faced threats from all directions: Spain, France, Scotland, and even from within her own court. However, instead of reacting with panic or war, she played her cards slowly. One of her biggest strengths was knowing when not to act. She avoided rushing into foreign alliances and even refused to marry. This particularly confused many leaders across Europe who expected her to align with a powerful king, but to Elizabeth, that was precisely the point. As long as she stayed single, every country kept hoping she'd marry their prince, and no one wanted to attack a queen who might soon be family. Knowing this, she used her own marriage as a political shield for decades, outsmarting rulers who underestimated her because she was a female leader. Unfortunately, diplomacy only went so far, and eventually, war broke out. One of her greatest military triumphs occurred in 1588, when Spain, then the wealthiest and most powerful empire in the world, dispatched a massive naval fleet known as the Spanish Armada to invade England. Unlike what most people expected of a queen, Elizabeth didn't just sit in the palace, shielded by the palace walls, and let the men make the decisions. She traveled to the coast and gave a famous speech to her troops, saying she had the heart and stomach of a king. As dramatic as that moment sounds, it was actually strategic. Her presence energized the country, and the storm-struck Armada was defeated by a smaller, more agile English navy. This made Elizabeth's reputation skyrocket. Her reign isn't only remembered for its iconic wars. The Elizabethan era became one of the most memorable periods in English history. It was during her time that William Shakespeare began writing his plays. Theaters grew more popular than ever, and literature, music, and art flourished like never before. What made it all so special wasn't just the talent of the artists, it was the generally happy mood of the country. Elizabeth seemed to make England a place where creativity was safe and even celebrated, as long as it didn't challenge the crown. She recognized the power of entertainment and leveraged it to establish a national identity. Her court became the spot where poets and thinkers were valued. England was finally seeing itself as more than just a small island. Politically, Elizabeth was a master of subtle control. She knew she couldn't rule with brute force like her father, so she relied on strategy and charm. Parliament existed, but she rarely let it influence her decisions. Her speeches were full of clever turns and gentle flattery, but they left no doubt about who was in charge. She surrounded herself with loyal, skilled advisors, but never allowed anyone to become too powerful. Even when she faced conspiracies like the one involving Mary, Queen of Scots, she handled them with cold precision. The Queen of Scots was eventually executed as a traitor, proving that Elizabeth would not tolerate threats, even from royalty. As much as the people of England praised her choices and political decisions, one still didn't sit well with them: her refusal to marry or have any children. From the start, Elizabeth made it clear she would not marry just to follow tradition, but that didn't stop powerful men abroad. She received proposals from Spanish princes, French dukes, and even her own English courtiers. But to everyone's surprise, Elizabeth turned them all down. She didn't give a straightforward reason for refusing them all. Instead, she kept everyone guessing, and this part was quite strange, considering her decision never to marry. Each time she turned down a proposal and chose to stay single, she kept the door open for new marriage negotiations. It seemed she was playing games by doing this, but it was actually her genius self at play. She used the idea of marriage like a card she never played but always had in her hand. She knew the moment she married, her power would belong to her husband, so by refusing, she kept it all to herself. Besides being political, her choice was also very personal. For many years, Elizabeth had seen firsthand how marriage destroyed her mother. Anne Boleyn was executed by her own husband, and that left a scar no child forgets. Then there was her sister Mary, who married Philip of Spain only to become unpopular and die unhappy. So Elizabeth believed she had every reason to be cautious. She had seen how marriage could trap a woman, especially a queen, and she had no interest in sharing her power or becoming a pawn in anyone's plan. Although some historians believe she may have fallen in love with her close friend and advisor Robert Dudley, that relationship never turned into a marriage. She seemed to think that loving someone and trusting them were two very different things. As her reign spanned decades, staying single became Elizabeth's defining identity. She called herself the Virgin Queen, and that title took on a kind of mythic power. Her unmarried status became sacred, and she wasn't just England's queen, she was England's bride. That idea made her untouchable in a way no married queen could be. It was smart politics, but it also influenced how people viewed her. Portraits began to show her as young and ageless, making her the epitome of purity and strength. Of course, not everyone still admired that choice. As she started to age, some critics feared that without a successor, the kingdom would fall into chaos the moment she died. Others thought her refusal to marry showed cruelty or pride. Foreign leaders saw her as unreliable, while Catholic enemies called her unnatural. Even in England, some nobles whispered that her refusal to have children was very selfish, but Elizabeth refused to let public pressure dictate her private life. She stood on the conviction that she was married to her country, and for her, that was enough. She knew the risks, but she also knew what she stood to lose if she chose differently. After her reign hit the 4th decade mark, the issue of succession worsened. The one question everyone asked with each passing day was, without children, who would take the throne? Elizabeth had still not named an heir. She understood that naming one would divide her court and weaken her rule, so she stayed silent about it, even when it created uncertainty. Just as everyone had feared, the fateful day arrived, the day Elizabeth I passed away. The Queen, without an heir, died on the 24th of March, 1603, at the age of 69 after ruling England for 45 years. After her death, the crown passed to James VI of Scotland, the son of her executed cousin Mary, Queen of Scots. That transition was smoother than many feared, but the tension leading up to it was very real. Elizabeth had spent her entire reign balancing control, and naming an heir too soon would have tipped that balance away from her. But that lack of heirs did something unexpected. It made Elizabeth's reign stand out even more. Most monarchs are remembered through the family line they leave behind, but then there's Elizabeth, who left no dynasty. What she did leave behind was her own legacy that lasted longer than many bloodlines. Her name became associated with an entire era known as the Elizabethan Age. The culture, politics, battles, and triumphs of England all pointed back to the same woman. Because she had no children, her reign and life story ended very cleanly, without an heir to possibly taint it. She ruled until the very end, and then she was gone. Even today, people debate whether her childlessness was a strength or a flaw. On one hand, it left England vulnerable to uncertainty after her death, but on the other hand, it gave her the freedom to rule exactly how she wanted. She never held the titles of mother, wife, or widow. She was always the queen, and by avoiding all the chaos of royal children and foreign husbands, she focused entirely on her country. In an era when women were rarely allowed to lead, Elizabeth led an empire and made history. Sure, she didn't leave an heir, but she left a model legacy of power that outlived her by centuries. She changed how people thought about women in power, she inspired loyalty, fear, and respect, and she made England stronger, wealthier, and more confident than it had ever been. From a risky start to a legendary reign, Elizabeth I proved that prominence doesn't need any heirs. If you found her story as interesting and inspiring as we did, then hit that like button and subscribe for more untold royal history. We'd love to know in the comments, do you think Elizabeth I made the right choice by staying single, and what other monarchs should we cover?